Hello, welcome to another event of the 18th International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival, DOCU Days UA. Even if it comes to an end, you still have all of us, 2 more days to watch films online. And of course, this year there were a lot of hopes that there will be a hybrid form of festival. There will be online and offline events, but unfortunately, due to lockdown imposed in Kyiv, we had to move online. And this is why we also have to conduct our docu class online instead of having the pleasure of greeting in Ukraine, in Kiev, our colleague, our guest. We are talking today with Hubert Sauper or Hubert Sauper, depends which language or pronunciation you use. Internationally acclaimed film director. This year, DocuDays featured his film El Epicentro, The Epicenter. The film premiered internationally, globally last year and won a grand jury prize at Sundance Film Festival. But Hubert's name is not new to DocuDays UA audience. In 2015, another film of his, We Come as Friends, has been screened at DocuDays UA. So we are happy to greet you again, Hubert, to greet you here. And today's topic is designated as political documentary. So you are giving a class, docu class on political documentary, as someone who dedicated your life to documentary making, and no doubt every your documentary can be regarded as anything but like they're all very political. Hubert, I'm happy to see you and hear you, even if not in offline world. Hello.
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you or meet you. I am on a beautiful place on a little farm in France. Let me just show you the view from my little place. And I was a few years back in Kyiv. I had an amazing time and very interesting encounters. And one of the reasons why I especially enjoyed being in Kyiv is that Kyiv is one of the places on the planet which can be called a collision line. It's a friction line between big forces, and everybody knows that in Europe there is Sarajevo that triggered the First World War. In the Caribbean there is Havana, Cuba, which is the friction line between North and South and East and West. And in Central Eastern Europe, Ukraine is one of these places where empires clash, I would say. And it is very much the essence of my work to describe these places. One of these places is also very crucial. It's called Fashoda in Central Africa. This is where colonial powers, the two big colonial powers, collided: the French and the British 100 years ago, on the river of Nile, which is South Sudan now. And ironically, on the same place now, the Chinese and the Americans are colliding for same reasons, for domination. Anyway, I'm happy to talk to you in Ukraine. First of all, today we are going to talk about, I think, Epicentro a lot, which is my latest film, shot in one of these places in Cuba, Havana, which is the birthplace of the US American imperialism. But first I want to say something about the theme of this class. It is, when you say political documentary, it is also in a way, it's already a redundancy. It's an oxymoron in a way, because documentary cannot be non-political. It is by nature a political act to take a camera, to choose a story, to travel in the world, and to create something very synthetic, which is called a cinema movie. And it is every step and every breath you take as a documentary filmmaker is a political act. And of course, even people who make films about giraffes is in the Serengeti is in a way a political act, because the people who film giraffes and lions in the Serengeti, they tend to not film the people who live in the same area, which are the Maasai, and if they are filmed, they usually filmed as like a kind of a tourist attraction. So it's already it's a choice, and it's a political statement. It is in this case a neo-colonial statement, by the way. So what I try to do, and I hope that many people who listen to us now have just seen Epicentro. Is that the case, Maxime? Is that so?
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. I
Because
haven't seen it, of course, but yeah.
I don't know how many people have seen my other films. How many people have seen Darwin's Nightmare, We Come as Friends, Kisangani Diary. All of my films are in a way radical. I never pretend to provide a objective journalistic view, because even that in itself is a lie, because even no news broadcaster can be fully objective. It's always a point of view. It's always a choice of what kind of reality you present and which way you present it. So it's already subjective in a way. What is a little bit specific, I think, about the work I do is that I take on themes which are kind of too big to describe, which is globalism, imperialism, North and South dialectic, humiliation of one people to the other. These stories are usually explained by intellectuals like you, Maxime, and usually in the same format. Is like you are sitting in your office and you have many books behind you, and people like you are explaining us the world, and this is called usually documentary films, which is not necessarily a film for me. This is not really cinema. It's called reportage. It's called I don't know, TV show, TV feature. But when you talk about documentary film, keep in mind that we're talking about film as an art form, cinema as a culture, and as a kind of a language, because cinema is a language that is being created, learned, and perceived in a very creative way. For example, what used to be called experimental style movies 50 years ago, now it's just a movie. I remember when I made Darwin's Nightmare, which is a film about gun running, by the way, Ukrainian pilots in Africa. It has to do with Ukraine, Darwin's Nightmare.
Yes, yes.
So I don't know, maybe a lot of people saw it in Ukraine, I don't know. But the form of this movie was, I think, 18 years ago when it came out, and it was nominated for an Oscar, which was kind of a miracle, because these kind of films were never nominated for an Oscar before, I think. By the way, that year, The March of the Penguins has actually won an Oscar. But it was considered as experimental, as art house European movie. And it was considered as something for a minority. When you see Darwin's Nightmare now, 15 years later, it doesn't look like an experimental film. It's a documentary film, which means that the capacity and the visual literacy of a general public, of more and more people, has become more fine and more refined and more tuned to movies like what I'm just saying. It means that we filmmakers, or also, I mean, writers of novels, or also painters, of course, and any kind of art, we are pushing the boundaries a little bit every time. Of course, we have to kind of, in cinema at least, keep in mind that we're talking to thousands or millions of people sometimes, and you need to kind of consider the audience, that they can follow an argumentation, follow a poetic form. But I'm using the word poetry a lot, even though my films are political. Is that the poetic form is very crucial to my films, because cinema is not a Wikipedia page that gives you information and feeds you with numbers and figures. It is in its best way an experience. It's a journey that you engage the audience in. So the audience is sitting down in the dark room and going on a journey for 2 years. I'm saying for 2 hours. 2-year long film. That's a long film. So,
Sure.
so but the 2 hours of film are 2 years of my life, or 4 or 5 or 7 years. My longest work was 7 years of work. Become as friends. 7 years of my life, 2 hours of life experience for a few million people.
Uh, and
Yeah.
by the way, how many years did you dedicate to Epicentro?
Uh,
How many
Epicentro,
years of your life?
Epicentro was 3 years. I spent 3 years in Havana, Cuba. I moved to Havana. I had a little place there. I was teaching there at the film school, so I had a legal status in Cuba. I was welcomed by the government because I had a job, and I spent 3 amazing years of my life. And I think it's the most joyful film I've ever made. Even though I think it talks about something very serious and very sad also, which is the domination of the U.S. American, imperialistic force, exterior wars all over the world. Anyone who knows about world politics knows what the Iraq War, Vietnam War, means to the people who live in these places, or Afghanistan, or any countries, or the Great Lakes region in Africa, or the Central American countries, what it means to be subjected to the devastating force of exterior imperialism. And the first war of this form, like the invasion of Iraq, like Afghanistan, like Vietnam, the first time the US tried this kind of formula was the Spanish-American War in 1898. It was the war against Spain, because Spain was was a colonial force in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. There was a casus bellis, the explosion of a U.S.-American ship. The U.S. Government claimed that Spain has bombed its ship, the Maine, and then started the U.S.-American War, the Spanish-American War, and that war was short militarily, but what was very important and very interesting was it was very hard to convince the American public opinion that the U.S. should attack, an island in the Pacific called the Philippines, which is the other side of the world, and should attack Cuba. Most U.S. Americans didn't know where Cuba was. Even today, most people don't know where it is, even though it's very close. But so the problem was not to the U.S. To have enough ships and bombs and soldiers to attack the Spanish Empire. The biggest problem was to convince the American people who were essentially peaceful and who were also tired from the from the American Civil War, which is only 30 years earlier. So the US didn't want wars, but some people, figured that now it's time to, to become an exterior power and to become a colonial power, even though the word colonialism was never really used, because of course it's a big paradox, because the US itself celebrated Independence Day from being free from the colonial European powers. So it was a very complicated thing to communicate why we should celebrate it. We are in the US yet, talking from the point of view of the US. Why should we should celebrate that we are free from the British and the French, and at the same time attack some islands in the Pacific and then dominate them. So this narrative was the key factor, how to sell the necessity of this war to the American people. Now, I'm talking now about the theme of Epicentro, which is my latest movie. Of course, it's better to see the movie, but I give you just a 2-minute pitch for the people who haven't seen it. The most interesting part of the beginning of the American Empire was, first of all, that it started in the port of Havana with one explosion in the middle of the night in February 27th, 1898, when this American ship blew up. But the only way to convince the American people that war is necessary was a new technology and a new kind of journalism. A new kind of journalism can be considered journalism of sensationalism. It's called the yellow press. William Randolph Hearst was one of the biggest barons of this kind of new form of press. So it's essentially the press was using very little facts and very much sensationalism to villainize the Spanish devils, the Spanish rats. That's how they called it, and that the Hispanic human was described as inferior and evil and untrustworthy and dirty. All these things that kind of re-became the narrative of the former US president, by the way, calling the Mexicans, rapists and thieves.
Yeah.
So, but the more interesting thing is that the US American Empire, which is the empire of the image, the empire of soft power, the empire that is representing itself and its values through an amazing thing called Hollywood, and now the internet. Hollywood didn't exist in 1898, but cinema existed. 3 years earlier, cinema was invented in France, in Paris. The brothers Lumiere were, filming a train that's coming, people running up and down or out of a factory. Méliès was filming little, magical tricks with cameras. But the US American idea was to use, for the first time in history, cinema as an extremely powerful political tool, political propaganda. So the first films that humans in the US have ever seen in their lives, the first time they saw photos moving on a screen, a film, were pictures from the war against Spain. And the war against Spain was filmed before it actually happened with actors. and the explosion of the main was reproduced in models in a little bathtub with little model ships blown up with firecrackers and with smoke of cigars in a bathtub in New York. And that was shown as documentary, as real. And people who had never seen anything like that, anything moving on the screen, were just fascinated and said, you know, they were like ready to send their sons to war against the Spanish evil empire. So the persuasion and the power of cinema was unthinkable. It literally changed everything on our planet. That invention, which we are now doing, and I'm a filmmaker, and I'm even a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures in America, which is very a big paradox in a way. But I don't make you know, Hollywood movies. I don't consider myself as a part of this industry, but I am in one way too.
You are making films which are political in non-narrow sense, so you are also part of this force of persuasion, but not with the same goals, of course. But you know, after seeing Epicentro, of course, I got my head packed with questions and notions and everything. And very important part of your film is showing these very early short films produced by Thomas Edison, by Americans, presented as documentaries from American-Spanish War, and you deconstruct them, or rather your characters, your little prophets, as you call them, as you dub them in the final titles, they deconstruct them as well. They manage to understand, local kids from Cuba, that these are not real images, that they are fake news. Also, if to use the language of the previous American president. But what also stunned me in a way, it is quite often told, this story, that after defeating Spaniards, Americans were originally perceived by a big part of Cuban population as some sort of liberators. They came as friends, you know. It didn't last long though, because it turned out that the United States of America came there to stay. And it's somehow echoed to me with contemporary situation in Ukraine. I presume some part of our audience who are watching us now, a Ukrainian audience, they, in Ukrainian current political and military situation, also somehow try to find themselves in the system of coordinates where there is an empire, and the word empire in Ukraine is primarily used towards Russia, assigned to Russian Federation. And of course, there is this line of conflict. So the United States are perceived by many people as friends. Have you got any advice or any comment on that? Because you filmed, as you mentioned, that in many places at these lines of friction. What to do if the society, community finds itself between two superpowers or two big powers with imperial ambitions or with global ambitions?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, I have no advice to give to Ukrainians. I mean, I know too little about the specific story, and it's the only thing I can see over the years is that many things are very universal and are patterns that are always revolving, you know, you know, some places on the planet have the unfortunate history that they are geographically in the middle of the crossfire, where collision line, so to say, or uh, or geographically on a place where it happens to be oil in the ground or diamonds or gold. You know, it's always a curse for the people who live there, and it's always being exploited by an extreme minority. Um, it is like the, the worst of country, I guess, in the world is the Congo, which is one of the richest countries in the world in terms of minerals and land and forest and water. But you know, you're Maxime, you're a human rights expert. You know that millions of people are over the last 20 years or my first film in Africa was in Congo, by the way, in Kisangani. And that was the beginning of a long series of civil war, which is 1997, 18 I was going to say. 1997. From then on, I think is it 6 million people died in the east of Congo. You should know figures better, but it is so much, it's just unthinkable. And it's hardly reported.
It is.
It's hardly reported.
It
And
is.
it is so unthinkable. It is cognitive dissonance. We cannot get this in our heads. We cannot. It's like there was one, I remember there was a poster or a campaign by Amnesty International, which was very powerful. It was saying, you know, we all know that in 9/11 in New York, I think 2,000 or 3,000 people died in one day, right? Through the terrorist attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a picture made by Amnesty International with the Congolese forest. In the background, you see the Twin Towers. And the text said, in the east of the Congo, the rate of daily murders is about 3,000 by genocide. And that means that 9/11 happens in the Congo every day for the last 20 years. So that it's just unthinkable. It's unthinkable. And one of the reasons why we know so little about is that our communication is tuned to maintain the status quo. That our cell phones are working with coltan from that region. But so we cannot admit. I'm saying we, the industrial nations, we cannot admit fully that our way of life is based on murder and plunder. It's too much. People cannot get their head around it. And we have many hundreds of
Yeah.
years training in perverting narrative. You know, it's we have like, I don't know, the Catholic Church talking about modesty and how Jesus was giving everything he had, and look at the gold that is piling up in Rome. It's just, and we cannot. It's just so far off. The narrative and the reality is just so far apart. Anyway, so what was I going to say? I mean, why the world is still running the way it is that we, again, the let's say the industrial world, maintain a kind of monopoly on propaganda, on auto propaganda, on communication, to run a machine of soft power that is everything, that is moving images, that is cinema, that is television, that is shows, that is internet, that is convincing ourselves that things are the way they are, and that it is amazing to have a big house with a pool. It's cool to have a private jet. It's why, you know, in Epicentro, for example, the kids, the children who are my characters in my film, are of course the outcome of the Cuban Revolution, but they dream about once in their lifetime to jump into the swimming pool of a 5-star hotel. Why? Because they've seen it. They've seen Angelina Jolie on a pool on television. That's it. So their mind
Mm-hmm.
is conditioned. Like my mind and everyone who comes to Cuba is amazed by the beautiful architecture of colonial times, the beautiful old American cars without a roof, and the palm trees. Why do I think this is beautiful? Because I've seen a million times Humphrey Bogart in a movie driving in an open top car with a blonde actress next to him. So I'm tuned to that, and then I see that, and I think subconsciously, this is amazing, this is beautiful. But I'm the outcome. I'm the any Western person who comes to Havana, Cuba, just looks around with an open mouth and goes like, oh my God, this is amazing. Why? Because everyone feels like being in the middle of a movie, essentially, and being in a different time too, because you can see cars that usually you can only see in the movies, and now suddenly you see them as a regular taxi. But it's the conditioning, and so we are, I'm a movie maker, but I'm just as much as anyone in the Western world. The result, my brain is the result of, in parts, that machine, which is called Hollywood, if we want or not.
As everyone else is, I presume, yeah, no one can say that we are free from influences if we are able to talk,
Yes,
change views. But of course, also, it's quite often that, upon watching the film, especially when it comes to documentary, some part of the audience tries to interpret what was the intention of the director in terms of clear-cut conclusions. Like after the watching the Epicentro, I presume, it's my wild guess, but some people could probably say we witness some sort of nostalgia here, and at the end of the day, the director didn't say was Fidel Castro good or bad, or what did he think about Cuban regime? We didn't understand it, and I presume another part probably thought that you actually rather liked it, or maybe not. And I think the same for many other films.
yeah.
That some people want clear-cut answers to the questions: good or bad, black or white, what side are you on, etc. So what would you say when it comes to the Epicenter and probably other films of yours?
Well, yeah, it's interesting what you say. I mean, first of all, if you want clear-cut answers, it's like if you're essentially claiming that the filmmaker is supposed to be a prophet to show you the way, right? Which is bullshit. I'm not a prophet. I'm Hubert. I'm trying to see the world, understand the world, represent it in a way. But I don't know. I never met Fidel Castro. I have very conflicting opinions. People are ready to die for the revolution even today. Some people say it's an evil dictatorship, and I guess both is true in a way. Both is true in different contexts, right? Um, but I'm not. I'm not interested in kind of claiming that I now found the truth and I will proclaim the truth in a movie to make a million people to understand my truth. I don't, and I'm not interested. What I'm interested in is to politicize people and to make people sensible to certain questions which they may have not asked themselves before. So a good movie is, to me, stimulating. It is an experience. It is a movie, and it makes you kind of uh, it makes you fascinated by the questions that are sometimes arising. It makes you understand that the things that you were certain about maybe are not so certain anymore. And that is a very interesting process. That's called a political process. And it's very creative. And I think what is the most powerful part of cinema is actually the emotional part, because I don't know. Let's as an example, 50 years ago or 60 years ago, a few professors from Harvard said that we shouldn't dump poison into the oceans, or we shouldn't poison the insects on the fields because it's going to be ecologically problematic. So, but people didn't know what is the word ecological. Most people said the ocean is big. What is this stupid professor talking about? And even though the professors had facts and figures, it was not sinking in to the minds and the thinking structure of a large audience. So one person who found kind of a key to broadening the idea of the ecological movement was Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson was a scientist. She was very specific about, if we poison the insects on the fields, it's going to be very bad for the future of humans. But she found a poetic image. She wrote a book called The Silent Spring. The Silent Spring means if we poison a very simple thing that nowadays every child knows. If we poison the insects on the field, the birds will have no food, and next springtime it will be silent because we will not hear the birds singing. But the idea to not hear the birds singing is a poetic alarm. It's like, oh my God, no more birds, no more butterflies. So the scientific argument, of course, is the basis, and is very important. But what brings a factual idea to the audience is very often a metaphor, an image, or a piece of art. And that's why art is always political. And that's why now it's like we are in a time now into 2021 that I think every religious leader, every scientist, every politician knows that if they want to communicate in a way that is powerful and forceful an idea, they need moving images. And they need moving images which are, put together in an intelligent and creative way. That's called filmmaking.
Well, that's a huge power. What you are saying, and yes, when we think about it, we realize that we know that impression, image, almost always is more powerful in terms of individual reaction than numbers or dry effects, like this example with Silent Spring, which you just told about. Or I remember at the time of biggest numbers of refugees from the Middle East arrived to the European Union countries in 2015, and were discussions about numbers mostly. There was this moment in time when this image, this photo, has been published of dead body of a 3-year-old boy at the seashore.
Yes.
Yes, and it was so impressive and tragic, and it was triggering very strong emotions. And suddenly there were afterward there was some research that indicated it changed the tone of discussion about the contemporary situation of refugees in Europe in social networks, with one image, not with numbers. But this is, of course, a huge power which belongs to artists, to the film directors, to people like you. Do you think anyone who wants to make a documentary, specifically if he or she considers it to be political documentary, should be aware of that, should keep that in mind? And is it rather an advantage or a threat or a risk?
Well, essentially, making movies is like talking to many people at the same time. You're interacting with many people. Only you have months and years of time to formulate your proposition. Um, the idea of power and responsibility is of course very complicated, because the best meaning films to discredit torture. Again, you should know that about. Let me give you an example about torture in Algeria. The Année Zero, the film that was made with actual ex-participants of the civil war in Algeria, to denounce essentially torture and to make people sensible about these cruelties, etc. This movie, let's say, opened the eyes of many people in France, made many people more sensible about the abuse of human rights, and made people like yourself work, maybe dedicate their lives to this cause. But the same movie stimulated the right-wing governments in the School of the Americas in Latin America how to torture. And they were using actually techniques from that movie and implemented and killed people. So can you accuse the filmmaker of indirectly killing people in Nicaragua? You cannot, because the filmmaker is not, it is not possible to kind of anticipate all the the ways. When you make a movie, you cannot anticipate a million different ways of reading of your movie, and you cannot be responsible, so to say, for the whole outcome of it. Understand?
Of course.
So it is a very difficult question. Also, the question of the ethics. What can you show? What can you not show? What is too much to show? It is a very, very complicated process, and it is a very complicated job that we have, filmmakers. There is no recipe.
That was basically my next question, and you just started answering it, I presume. Have you ever been in situations when you had to decide, no, I will not show this. I have it, I filmed it, but no. Not due to artistic reasons, not as a filmmaker, but as a filmmaker, as a person who has the power, control what these thousands of people you are talking to with your film probably shouldn't see, not to be traumatized or not to be misled. Have you ever been in these situations? And if so,
Yeah.
what have you decided?
Yes, many times. Mostly in my first film about the genocide in the east of the Congo. It's called Kisangani Diary. If you have 10 hours of footage of a civil war and genocide, and you make a movie that is half an hour or 45 minutes long, you essentially censor 90% of the material. You cut it out, and sometimes it is the decision of a filmmaker to show something that is almost unbearable to see and cruel, because what you witness as a filmmaker is not necessarily something you should hide in your drawer. It's like it belongs to humans, humanity. If I witness somebody killing a child in a street, a drunken driver running over a 5-year-old kid, if I happen to film that, or if somebody happens to film the murder of George Floyd, you can say you shouldn't show that because it's a murder and it's not ethical, but not showing it is also not ethical. So if this horrible piece of film that we all saw, most of us in the planet, of this useless murder of this poor man, in the US. That
Yeah.
is, it was like, you could argue it is a human being has the right to die in dignity and not to be brought to TV broadcasted the way you die, of course, you know. But if we hadn't seen it, it wouldn't have triggered a wave of indignation and protest, which is very necessary. So it's hard. And of course, as a filmmaker, I had many times this question: how far can I go? How much can I show? And there were actually pictures that I could not share with anyone. It was too much.
So that they just stay with you, not with your audience.
Yeah, they stay with
you
me.
are the only keeper
Yes.
of the most horrible images.
Well,
I'm
sorry.
The choice has.
No, just to finish this question, it's not that I didn't want to show it because it's horrible, but because it wouldn't have, in my view as a filmmaker, helped the argumentation of a movie. It's like, you can call it violence pornography. That makes no sense, right? But if you show violence in a context that you understand, how, you know, emotionally understand where you are and where it leads you, and you can kind of, there is an image of there's one image of a child in agony, 3-4-year-old child dying, literally dying. That image is so terrifying, but it is a part of my movie, and it's only possible to see this image inside of the movie. So, for example, every television station that showed this film, I made them sign a letter with lawyers that they can never use this image for a trailer, for example, to announce the movie. They cannot. So it can only exist inside, because I'm deciding that this is the way I can represent it to the world. And I shot this film. It is very big. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. It is extremely complicated and unpredictable.
And I presume the choice is personal and individual, but the responsibility is too.
Yes, but
you dedicate. Yeah.
No, as I said, you cannot be responsible for the way how 1 million people read your films.
Yeah. I just mean if someone uses like horror for nothing, as you just said, if it's not in the context, if it doesn't help anything, if it doesn't assist. Yeah, and your films are mostly dedicated to hard topics, situations, to tragic events. Would it be Kisangani Diary or Darwin's Nightmare? We Come as Friends. It's not a nice and comfortable film to watch. And comparing to this, Epicentro is really kind of nice. You know, it's really, it's not comfy, of course, but it's really touching. I've even read in one of the reviews. With that review, I disagree on many points, but one was a big part of the film is like the director's home video, where he enjoys walking around with his little friends. It's like nice and cozy. You don't think it's true, but the overall mood can be perceived as different. And by the way, we have a comment from our viewer, Victoria, and she sent a message: "Thank you for the Epicentro film. I did not perceive it as a political film, but rather as a poetic declaration of love to Cuba and its people. The political component of this film is the only one narrow line." That's an opinion. And there is a question: do you believe that TV stories are able to displace documentaries in the near future? So this is the question from Vasilina. Already another viewer. what do you think?
I didn't understand the question.
It's from another member of audience, Vasilina. Do you believe that TV stories, like TV series, I believe,
Uh,
are able to replace documentaries in the near future?
Of course not. No, it's a very different story. You know, it's like can the phone book replace novels? You know, no, it's a different thing. That's the answer.
And on,
but of course, because I mean, maybe the person wants to say that cinema in its physical form is ending. That we don't go to physical cinemas anymore, and we will see films on TV. But it's not because, let's say, my films, because they're shown on TV. It doesn't mean it's a TV program. It's still a film. Yeah? It's still a movie.
mhm,
And no, the answer is no. It will not replace it because it's a very different form. Yes, but it's
mhm.
yes. And what
And when it comes,
yes.
yeah,
No, I mean, and the first person considers Epicentro not political. That is the first time I hear that kind of thing, because every shot is a political statement. Every shot, and it doesn't mean that
but
my
see here, it's
it doesn't.
one narrow line.
Yes, but you know, it's the right of everyone to read a film that they can, as much as they. Everyone has their own keys to reality and their own keys to cinema and books, and not everyone has the same kind of keys. You know, that's
Yeah.
if you have
And
tried.
another comment from the same member of audience: a good movie is an experience gained by the audience. The exact definition. Uh, by the way, when thinking and talking about film in Cuba, I presume some members of the audience would ask. Well, we have one moment in the film where one of the characters has to uh, makes a remark. I'm only saying good things about Cuba to someone passing by. Were there any obstacles for you to film something? I mean, from the authorities or from like, people who wouldn't like to say some things aloud, or no?
No, absolutely not. As I said before, I was teaching in the International Film School in Havana, in near Havana, and I was received in a very open and friendly way by the authorities. Um, I presume that the security apparatus in Cuba is very sophisticated, and I presume they were checking out who I'm talking to, who I'm calling on my phone. I think they knew a lot about me, but I was playing with
Mhm,
open, you know, um, and I mean also the way I work. I don't need to you know, block half of old Havana to make my films. You know, I don't need big technical efforts and masses of people to do one thing or another thing. I just make a sort of intimate uh, cinema where the intimate and the close contact to humans and to the thinking landscape of humans is the center. So in that sense, it is easy to work this way, because if you sit with one person in a room uh, at midnight with a candle and a small camera and you talk to this person, there is no
mhm.
state security who can avoid that, you know. But
Yeah.
I
So,
was received well in Cuba, but I also anticipated the fact that it could not be going well, and I was therefore already in the beginning kind of presenting myself. I was talking very openly to the authorities what I'm doing. I showed them my films that I've been making before, and my other films that I had made in Africa were known in Cuba. They were in cinemas, so I was
Hmm.
I'm known as a filmmaker in Cuba. So that's makes life
Hmm.
easy.
I'm reminded that we've got less than 5 minutes left, unfortunately. But unfortunately for me, in particular, because I've got so many questions left, I hope we were able to continue our conversation, discussion in different forums afterwards. And maybe someday there will be another film of yours and you will be able to come to Kyiv
I would like to.
physically for the screening after the victory over COVID-19. But I'll pick two questions for the end. One is rather personal, not in Epicentro. I've read that you filmed something like 200 hours of material
Yeah.
for the Epicenter, right? Uh, but while filming other films, while making other films, you happen to find yourself from time to time in basically life-threatening situations in some places in the world, like in some places in Africa, literally, where you could die while making a film. In the hindsight, was it worth it? Is it worth it to risk everything in your life to make a good, important film? Or if you knew that it would be dangerous, maybe you'd think twice.
Um, yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times in the press, I'm reading like about myself as if I would be this kind of daredevil, risking anything to do anything. I don't think I am, and I'm not an adrenaline junkie either. I just I measure the risks a lot. Um, but there are situations where I have to say I I I have to do what I have to do. There is no way back sometimes, and I cannot spend 7 years of my life to make a movie and then say, well, actually, I'm too tired to, or it's maybe too dangerous to go to the next village to film a scene that I was anticipating for the last 3 years. You do it because it has to happen.
Mhm.
But I'm more prudent than
Yeah.
you think. I mean, I flew with a small airplane from my little farm to Sudan, but I was careful. I wasn't a rocket man that was just doing something that is good for a GoPro or so. It's not. And
Mhm.
I was living inside of the zone of a civil war for years. But even then, you live in a country of civil war. You need to be informed. You need to know where people are shooting. You need to know which kind of warlords are potentially dangerous and which are not. Which region you should not go uh, at this moment. And that's it. It's navigating uh, danger in a way. A lot of things that we don't think
Mhm.
are dangerous are in the end very dangerous. It's like what's turned out to be very very dangerous is the effects of mob, the mob effect. In physically, you can be literally you can be eaten by a group of people and like torn in pieces if the energy rises in Central Africa. If because the hate, let's say, for example, the hundreds of years of redundancy and hatred to the white man, and rightfully, is inside of the soul of people. And then when you look like you and I, in certain places, you are the air. You are representing hundreds of years of humiliation. You are the white man who created a situation that makes millions of people lose their lives and their land and their livelihood and their gods and their children and everything, their honor. So you have to consider that. So that is sometimes dangerous. And what is also dangerous is stupid things like being bitten by an insect and then dying from malaria. But it's
Yeah.
not because, which happened to me twice, you know. But it's not because malaria is there. I'm not going to make a film in Central Africa. It is just a part of the risk. That's it.
Mm. Thank you very much, Hubert. Thank you. And thanks to all our members of audience who watched us this hour and will watch this recording. We've just talked about Epicentro, the latest so far film of Hubert Sauper, and about making political documentary. And to me, the main point was the starting point. Every documentary is political. And if you want to make a documentary and don't want to make political documentary, don't fool yourself, basically. It will be political if you want it or not. This is what the main thing I've got from this conversation. Thank you very much, Hubert. And I invite, of course, all our members of the audience to stay with Docu Days for 2 more days. Those in Ukraine can watch films. And also we have more events. In 1 hour, I invite you to join us for the interview with Ukrainian filmmakers about Ukrainian film. And of course, have a safe rest of the day and next days. Wash your hands, wear masks, etc. That's for me personally. Thank you. Thanks, Hubert.
Thank you for all of you, and warm greetings to Ukraine. I look forward to come see you with the next movie. A bientôt.
Welcome. Thanks a lot. A bientôt.